Hello friends, my name is Michelle Fondin and I'm the author of Help! I Think My Loved One is an Alcoholic, a survival guide for lovers, family, and friends. And welcome to my video forum. Today we're going to talk about how do I know if my loved one is serious about getting sober? Without a doubt, you've probably talked to your alcoholic loved one numerous times. Maybe you've begged and pleaded and coerced and reasoned and educated and talked to the person, and finally your alcoholic loved one says, okay, yeah, I'll go get help, I'll go get sober. Now maybe this has happened several times to you. I know it did happen several times to me, where my alcoholic loved one, after many nights and days of me reasoning, pleading, bargaining, making ultimatums and everything, he did agree to go get help. He did agree to sobriety. Now, ultimately, the choice is not yours. The choice is his or hers. So let's suppose you have an alcoholic spouse and he has promised time and time again that he would get sober. And each and every time, he's extremely convincing, isn't he? He's really convincing. When you present your arguments or you present your debates, he'll oftentimes just sit there and nod and agree with you and maybe even get emotional and maybe even break down and say, yes, I know I have a problem. I know this is a problem. And yes, I'm willing to go get help for my addiction. But, sometimes those times come, or one trick is that often the loved one will set a date way in advance or after some sort of milestone. So your alcoholic loved one may say, well, after New Year's, I'll go ahead and get sober, or after my birthday, I'll go ahead and get sober. And each and every time that you approach your alcoholic loved one and say, well, are you going to get sober? And they say, remember, I told you after New Year's, after my birthday, after St. Patty's Day is something my alcoholic loved one would often say. And so the alcoholic oftentimes will set a date on purpose well in advance just to make sure that you stay quiet and that you stop bothering him or her. And that's just another delay tactic. It's another way to get you off of their back. And that is an alcoholic tactic. And if you think about it, it's probably a tactic that you've used in relationships as well, maybe with your parents or with a sibling or with a friend who has urged you to make some changes in your life, and you've promised to make those changes just so that the person would get off your back. So I think that's more of a human condition than an alcoholic condition. However, that being said, alcoholics are quite adept at using this tactic in order to get you to stop talking. If you watched my video on caring versus enabling, you'll know that no amount of talking that you're going to do is going to convince your alcoholic loved one to stop drinking. Keep in mind that your alcoholic loved one has a disease, and that disease has taken over his brain and it is reigning his every thought. So whatever you say is just sounding like background noise. An alcoholic doesn't think the same way that you think. Your mind works totally differently. Think about it as speaking a foreign language, but your alcoholic loved one is speaking literally a different language, and he is hearing a different language than you. So if you don't speak Chinese, you only speak English, and somebody speaks to you in Chinese, then you're not going to understand a word that they're saying. It's not even going to register. It's just going to sound like gibberish to you. And inversely, if you have a friend who speaks only Italian and you speak only English, and you speak English to that Italian friend, then the English is going to sound like gibberish. So you understand that your alcoholic loved one has a different set of verbal skills, he has a different set of listening skills, and he has a different mindset about the entire issue surrounding the alcohol, the alcoholism, the addiction. So his brain does not work the way yours does. Believe me, I've tried to create logical explanations, logical arguments, logical letters and I've written tons of them to my alcoholic loved one in the past, where I pointed out A, B, C, D, and I gave fantastic arguments as to why he needs to get well. But since his receptivity wasn't there, since the language I was speaking wasn't the language that he was understanding, it didn't take hold. He didn't understand it. Now, another thing is that when you are trying to create a scenario to get another person to change, know that they will always be resistant to that change. It's part of human nature that if somebody else tries to change you, you're going to dig in your heels and not change on purpose. So those are a couple of things just to keep in mind when you think about trying to convince your alcoholic loved one to stop drinking. So let's go back to your alcoholic loved one has told you, has verbalized to you the desire for change. How do you believe him? How do you know that your alcoholic loved one is going to, in fact, change this time around? And you might be quite exhausted from this argument. You might be quite exhausted of, I've heard this before, the same song and dance. You say the same exact thing. You say you're going to change. You go to a couple of AA meetings, and then by the weekend, it's back to drinking. And so you really don't know. You've had this start and stop, and you really don't know whether or not you can take your alcoholic loved one seriously this time around. And it can be very heart-wrenching because you've waited for this moment. You've waited for years and maybe decades for this change to occur. You've loved this person. You really care about your alcoholic loved one. And I believe that. I care and love my alcoholic loved one as well. And so you're not sure. The trust has been broken. You're not sure whether or not your alcoholic loved one is really serious about this change. So let me give you a little indicator of something that I learned through experience and through my reading and research as well in talking to alcoholics who are in recovery. So the first thing you need to look for is action. So while your alcoholic loved one is speaking to you, you can listen, you can absorb what your alcoholic loved one is saying to you, but look for signs of action. Don't listen to what they're saying, watch what they're doing. Someone who is committed to change will take action steps toward that change. So your alcoholic loved one might go straight to the internet, look up AA meetings. Your alcoholic loved one may research rehab centers. Your alcoholic loved one may call the hospital and inquire about a detox program. Your alcoholic loved one is going to call up that friend who has recently gotten sober and say, hey, will you take me to a meeting? So look for those actual action steps that he or she will take in order to start the recovery program. None of this should come from you. It should all come from your alcoholic loved one. It's up to him or her to take those steps themselves. They really need to take those steps. Think of a baby learning how to walk. The mom can't force the baby to come up to 2 feet and take those first steps by pushing their feet. A baby who's not ready to walk is not going to walk. But a baby that is ready to walk needs to have the courage to take those first few steps. Now, sometimes they take the first steps by holding mom or dad's hands, and then they start walking. But ultimately, those steps that go along by themselves in order to start walking, they really have to have the courage to take the steps themselves. So think about it that way. Your alcoholic loved one needs the courage and the strength to take those steps for himself. Otherwise, it's not him doing it, it's you. And it's not your recovery in AA, it's his recovery in AA, unless if you're a recovering alcoholic and you need to go to AA. So it's up to your alcoholic loved one to take those action steps. So that's what you're going to do. Number 1, look for the action. No action, no sobriety. No action, no recovery. So it doesn't matter what beautiful words that he's constructing, because many alcoholics are very adept and very good at constructing beautiful phrases, beautiful words, and making lovely promises that will never come to pass. So step 2, you're going to look for a changed attitude. A changed attitude is something that comes deep, deep within. It comes from the inside, from the heart space, and it's just a changed perspective, a changed outlook on life, a changed view of how things are and how things could be if alcoholism were not a problem. This is called intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation means motivation that comes from this inner burning desire for change, this inner burning desire for motivation and movement forward rather than going back to old habits and patterns. This intrinsic motivation comes from something higher than the alcoholic loved one. It comes from something deeper and more meaningful. So it doesn't come from a place of extrinsic motivation, which is the desire to please others, the desire to get away from guilt, the desire to get away from blame. Those factors will never stick. Those factors might be a current motivating factor in the here and now, but rest assured, a few days down the road, that type of motivation will not stick. So a changed attitude will look something like, I can't do this anymore, I surrender, I give up, I can't live this lifestyle any further. Or I'm afraid that I will lose you, and I know right now inside of my heart that I will lose you if I don't get help, and I'm willing to do everything and anything I can to get that help. So those phrases, that meaningful dialogue comes from a real place of intrinsic motivation, something that comes from within. The third thing you need to look for is a spiritual awakening. In AA, in Al-Anon, and inside the rooms, as they call it, everyone talks about a spiritual awakening in sobriety. Everyone talks about a spiritual awakening in recovery. A spiritual awakening is when the alcoholic hits rock bottom and knows that they are powerless over alcohol. Their life has become unbearable, and they need to turn to a power greater than themselves in order to get help and get better. That moment is often called surrender. It's surrendering. It's saying, it's that white flag. I give up. I can't do this. I'm not powerful enough. I need to turn to something greater than myself, a higher power, in order to get help. It's when they can fall to their knees in prayer. They can fall to their knees in anguish, sobbing, crying, screaming, reaching out for help. And those are a few of the signs that become apparent when somebody is truly ready for sobriety, when someone is truly ready for recovery. If somebody has shown those signs toward recovery, such as taking action, a changed attitude, and a surrender to a higher power, know that that is only the beginning of the journey. Sobriety takes time. The brain is so affected by the disease of alcoholism. The brain is so affected by the chemicals that are infused into the body time and time again. The body is really polluted. So the physical body is polluted. The brain is polluted. Their mental state is polluted. Their spiritual lack is so polluted by this disease that it does take time. So even if you see the inklings, the beginnings of these changes in your alcoholic loved one as he desires sobriety, know that there's going to be a little bit of flip-flopping. He'll go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and it may take a few tries. So you can celebrate these new beginnings when your alcoholic loved one says, hey, I'm ready to get sober, and shows these signs. But brace yourself, stay in reality, look at things as they are. Don't judge too quickly, and be patient, because sobriety does take time. I'm wishing you many blessings for the day ahead. God bless.